Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk entitled Paper, Skin, and Dotting Eyes Nuance and Representation in Children's Books, a Conversation on Diversity and Representation in Children's Literature. I'm Annie Almario, and I will be your moderator for this talk. And with me are two very talented and multi awarded illustrators from the Philippines, Fran Alvarez and Isabel Roxas. And I will let Fran and Isabel introduce themselves to their talk. So take it away, Fran.
Okay, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Fran Alvarez. I'm an illustrator from the Philippines. I am based in the Philippines at the moment. And here are some of my books. I've placed like a range of some of the common topics that are also published in the Philippines locally. So I have books about values like fair share and self-love, books about the environment since the Philippines is a very biodiverse country. We have a lot of books about nature and also some books about culture. So mine is about music and instruments. But the book that I will be talking about the most today is my book, Sayaw ng Mga Kamay or Dancing Hands in English. Just a brief background on how it was made. Room to Read, a global nonprofit, held a workshop in the Philippines in 2019, and both the writing and the illustrations were workshopped in with Room to Read. So it was originally written and published in Filipino by Adarna House, and the English edition was published by Chronicle Books in 2023. And a second edition in Filipino was released also by Adarna House, and now it has a Korean and Chinese versions afterwards. So, Sayo ng Mga Kamay or Dancing Hands is a story about two friends. Sam moves into a new neighborhood and meets Mai, who is deaf. And at first they meet by chance, and then as the rest of the book goes, they grow closer together by learning sign language together. So when I made the characters, it was very important for us to depict the disabled character with integrity and not assume that the character is unhappy with her life. So a very dignified depiction of the disabled character. And also the illustrations were drawn focused on their personality and not on their nationality, even though the setting is in the Philippines and they're Filipino children, and it's about Filipino Sign Language. So uh, the the way I designed the hair, the flowing of the hair, the textured lines were based more on the personality of the characters. But also, since the setting is in the Philippines, I wanted to make sure that there were still, of course, Filipino elements, but drew just enough. So, in the environment, so we have like the tricycle that you ride around the cities, or the food illustrations is a specific dish in the Philippines called pinakbet. Like the kinds of uniforms that the children wear, and a very common plant in the Philippines called santan, which is like a reference to my own childhood also, because we used to pick the flowers and make friendship bracelets. So that's also like it played a significant symbolism in the story also. And the street games, which is taguan, which is tag, so hide and seek tag. And like the attire of the children, where we wear like shorts and t-shirt and slippers when we play outside. So we don't wear sneakers or something. We wear sneakers when we go to summer special, but when we play in the streets, we wear slippers. So those kinds of like little elements that reference to Filipino culture. As I mentioned earlier, so the style and the drawings of the characters were based on the tone of the story and the dynamics of sign language, which is very flowy and dynamic. So I used textured lines and like scratchy kind of coloring to reflect um, the movement of the whole story, and like to make something that's very dynamic and moving in real life on like show kind of reflect on a static page. And I used a limited palette and lots of negative space to kind of maintain the quietness and the gentleness of the story because it's a very like quiet, gentle progression of their friendship from when they meet by chance and then they grow closer together. So the focus really of the story is on the friendship and the gentleness of their the characters' relationship with each other. So even though it's about Filipino Sign Language and Filipino children set in the Philippines, the whole style, the stylistic choices that we made, and the just the overall tone of the book really focused on this one and not really on like making the characters brown or making their facial features like overly pronounced like Filipino or something. So just like a few thoughts before I pass on the mic to Pepper. I'm really happy to be able to represent our culture and our like our memories and our childhood, especially in global spaces like this. So I'm happy that our book is translated in many different languages, and like we get to take up space in uh, international publishing and like in venues like this because it makes everyone look in our direction also and gets to see our stories also. And I also appreciate the opportunity that we can show that there are so many ways to depict Filipino culture aside from stereotypical depictions of Filipinos and uh, like what everyone stereotypically knows about us. So it's also a challenge for me to express Filipino-ness in my own visual language as an illustrator without leaning into stereotypes and always try to express both my voice and also our culture in many different ways. So maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fran. I should also add that dancing hands or sayaw ng mga kamay, which Fran just presented to us, got into this year's White Raymond's test. So congratulations, Fran.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Isabel Rojas. It's spelled with an X, but we pronounce it as an H. And I am an author and illustrator, so I make picture books and also comics. I'm an author and illustrator based in New York, but I started out in the Philippines, and I worked there for over a decade. And when I was growing up, a lot of the books that I read were still foreign books. We had a lot of imported books. The industry was at its very nascent stage. In fact, I believe I read some books that still had characters with blonde hair. And so when I finally had the opportunity to start making books of my own, I really had in mind that we make books of about children who look like them, and the settings were very clear about celebrating vernacular design and environments. And when I immigrated to the U.S., I now live and work in New York City. This was in the early 2000s. I knew that I was coming into a marketplace that was very different from mine, so I didn't really question the fact that I was illustrating stories about witches or about Vikings, and that well, it's a predominantly white country. So I was like, okay, well, these are the characters I would be drawing, and then there was also never any real push to make the characters diverse. So this was the littlest Viking. And I think at some point, though, I wanted to make stylistic changes and start making characters that were, to my mind, pink. I thought I was being very adventurous. And then when Kirkus wrote about the book, it read as a light-skinned boy. And I was like, what? He's not light-skinned, he's just pink. But then I realized, oh, well, at that point, I think Kirkus now was trying to make a change in the way they made reviews and then not just calling out characters when they were characters of color, but just calling out characters for all colors. So even if it were light skin, that way you don't make it a special event for when you're talking about a book about a person of color. So, and in that case also, I felt like there began to be a shift also on the focus of the kinds of books that we were being made. So this book was written by Min Le, who's a Vietnamese American author. And then, so also even the projects I started receiving, I mean, it was kind of two things. Like I started making work that was more just more diverse, and then also the project started coming in that way. So I started with magazines and like single books that were compilations, and then eventually this is called Holding On. It was a story published by Athenaeum and written by Sophia Lee, who's also a Filipino author, and it's a story of a grandmother and her granddaughter. Yeah, and dementia also. But anyway, yeah, so it was more a concerted effort of trying to depict our, like Fran, like in subtle ways, like food and the environment, and also our color. And also our skin, which is a first conversation about race. And I was actually at this point, trying to be more experimental with the way I could talk about race and draw race. But at the same time, our publisher said, it's a very important time for us right now that the children see themselves. So it was really a pushback that we don't want it to be a metaphor. We don't want it to be figurative. We want it to be literal. So let's show the children themselves. And actually, I've come to see it their way, because when I do attend book fairs where children are bringing their parents to come purchase books for themselves, they really do. You can see their eyes light up when they're like, "Oh, well, I see a book for me." Um, and so, and this one is Leo's first book, Leo's first vote, which is about elections in the U.S. while we still have them. And I thought these were really interesting examples of how of European books, where I feel like they've done a really interesting approach to showing race, but also just a little more inventive and risky. But I mean, you can't do this in the US right now. I think it's very, very hard to push for like color, but not really color. I mean, maybe in a few years, but that's the exciting thing about it. I feel like it's constantly evolving and quickly. And then I'm showing you this project of mine called Team Hom, because I wanted to show also a variety of depicting the Asian life and Asian characters, not just always carrying our cultural baggage. It's not always a story about our being Asian in a different world, but it's really just, three kids who are really weird and they want to just have a good time. And yeah, they don't do their homework, that sort of thing. So it's like not a good Asian, but like diversity also in the approach of like how we show ourselves as normal people. Yeah. Normal kids. And I think that's the last slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel and Fran. I think everyone now knows why you both are so successful in your work, because your work really speaks for itself. So I just wanted to ask both of you, when should you stop thinking about skid cutter When you're it because we had I know I wanted Fran to share this with all of you when her book was originally published in the Philippines, but it got picked up by Chronicle Books, which is a US based publisher, and we had a pretty lengthy and insightful conversation with Chronicle Books about the color of the skin of the characters. But then when Fran and I were talking, because we published the Filipino version or the Filipino edition, we didn't even think of the skin color. It was the color of of paper, and then it was such a big issue with the U.S. publisher. So I was hoping Fran could talk about that experience.
When we worked on this book during the workshop, the assumption was it was going to be published in the Philippines and for the Philippine market. But as an illustrator, I wasn't really thinking about that because for me it was like just the characters and what the tone of the book uh, would be like. But yeah, when we published with Chronicle, as Annie mentioned, it became like a topic of conversation because for I guess for their from their perspective, when you see an illustration of a person without any kind of coloring, it's automatically white for them. So, but it was a Filipino book, so we tried to like color it in. So I made some samples with the characters colored in brown. But then it didn't look and feel the same way because across the book, the characters were drawn like with big shapes on the spread. And when we filled all those in, when you turn the pages, all you can see were just these big blocks of brown. And the focus on what they were doing or like the dynamics of the character, I think were like diluted because you were focused on just like the impact that the drawings that had the most impact on the page were the people in their skin color, which wasn't like the point of the story. So we talked about like retaining the drawings and having just no color, like no fills in the illustrations of the people. And Chronicle agreed to keep the illustrations and just push for the drawings to be as is when we first made them. And yeah, so I think when the book first started getting recognitions earlier this year, when I read the citations like with the ALA Schneider Family Book Award and the Ezra Jack Keats Foundation, I think that was what resonated with them also. That um, the book was focused on the friendship and their connections despite their disabilities and not really zone in too much on their race. So for like it was what set the book apart after all. So I think so I'm glad also that we really pushed for that and it made sense for everyone in the end also. So
I think it's also the perfect example of the publisher listening to the artist. So, which is a rare occurrence as a publisher. I must say that it was interesting, and there was a point where even I was, you know, getting hopeless that okay, just let them to color it in, or because just to make them stop talking about it. But I do understand it's a different culture, so we have to also listen to them and listen to their context. But what do you think, Isabel? Do you
I think it is something that I came to much later on because I was coming as a person who was within a majority, like a homogenous society, right? And then all of a sudden I go there and I couldn't really actually understand the problem or like the experience of the Asian American, the Filipino Americans who lived there, who were born and grew up there. Because then they grew up in either the predominantly, they were the minority or it was always mixed for them. So when I would have discussions with these creators, to them it's very important that there's a depiction because they felt unseen for so long. So, um, so to answer your question, how long will it be for us to be able to not think of, to be constantly
As a given.
or constantly thinking about it? I mean, I think it'll be a little bit of a while because it's only now that we're actually getting an opportunity to actually put it front and center. So, I mean, it's only now that publishing in the U.S. anyway is putting money behind these kinds of stories. So until that normalizes, I think we can start being more experimental about the depiction. Maybe in a decade or so is my guess.
Maybe I'm just wary of having token representation at some point. Like just, let's make sure one kid is brown and one kid is a little orange and one kid is blue because there are blue kids.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not even just color. I mean, even just we're also constantly being reminded that you should have a child with a head hearing aid or a wheelchair, and then and also yeah, for the Our Skin book, that was also something that we kind of we had multiple discussions about, is because, well, I mean, yes, if they're really part of the story or part of the community, but not necessarily just because we're constantly trying to check all the boxes. Because when does it start, like you said, becoming tokenism, and then when does it is actual effort to start a conversation about that particular issue?
And when there are givens like that or considerations, then um, art may be natural to artists like you. Does it prevent you from doing things that are, that not that deliberate or not that whimsical? Like, do you think about? I mean, I know how OC you both are, but are there aspects of your art that you don't really think about that deeply and you let your imagination or your whim take over?
I think it depends on the book. So I think from my experience, the books that I've gotten have very specific goals. For example, storybook with very not really poetic topics. Like the topic is clear. Like for example, siblings or something, and then you have the reference book. So I think for me, as long as like how I choose my imagery and characters, if the the goal is achieved, and then I can run with the rest of the elements. So with my book Hating Kapatid, which is about fair share in Filipino, like it's a very specific concept of fair share between siblings. So when I got the manuscript, um, the the characters, sorry, yeah. So these two, the first one was the ants. So when I first got the manuscript, it didn't really specify any names or anything for the characters. It just said siblings. And there were a lot of food involved with the book. And at that time, I, I was at the time when I really didn't like drawing people. So like I was thinking, who else or what else can I draw in this story as characters that can still drive the point of fair share with all these food involved. So I drew ants. So like
Why did you name it blue? Music of rock.
I drew them blue because, well, I first drew them black when I did the kid test, but then they ended looking like aliens. So I chose blue because the color blue doesn't show up naturally in food a lot. So most of our food, especially in the Philippines, are like brown, red, warm colors like that. So blue really stood out against all the food in the in the book. So that was like something like I think that's my in my work so far the best example of how I can still be whimsical about things but still make the goal of the book work. Yeah, sorry.
What about you, Isabel? Are there things in your life that are done on a whim?
No. No, I'm pretty deliberate. I think there was one time I made a book way back called yung Rizal book. Do you remember?
Is that the
The Ambitious Stethoscope. And
author is
Luis. And I think at that time I was still learning, and I had it was a newspaper collage piece, and then I just used random sheets of paper in the background, and then I got a few letters being like, why did you use this article and not that article? And I was like, oh God, I wasn't thinking about it. And then so ever since then, I was much more deliberate about the things that went into my books. In fact, there's probably nothing that I didn't think about in that book, because I know that people, especially children, are so focused on little details, and that if they pick up on it, you either it's like your gift to them. It's like a little surprise. And also sometimes if you don't think about it, usually that's the thing that you get in trouble for. So it's like, yeah.
So there's a group of kids who think that ants are blue because of Fran's doing, misinformation. Yeah, misinformation. Not in children's books, please. So, do you think about representing being Filipino? Do you think you think about it more because you're based in the US?
I feel like I've had to think about it more ever since I moved, because and especially since I started doing a lot of book fairs where we actually have a lot of interaction with our young readers. Because then in that case, or like when I do school visits, because then all the Filipino kids get so excited when they see that there's a Filipino author up on stage, or yeah, or just someone of color. They'll be like, oh, okay, like you're my people, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I want to be read by everybody. It's like, I don't, that's part of the reason why I wrote Team Palm that way. It's because like, I don't want to be just writing to Filipinos. I want to be read by all children. Uh, so I think about it, and I also don't.
Yeah. How are kids reacting to Team Pop? Do you get feedback from your kid trainers?
I really do, and I get drawings, and also like I think the one of the best I get fan art, but the best moment was, I think, a teacher wrote me to say that, because it's about, there are some friends who were rejected by their original friend group. And so I have teachers telling me that they have students who experience that, and then they say, oh, well, I'm going to have to make my own team poem. And, so it's kind of like giving them, a sanctuary, or, it's like, for me, I think books are friends. And to be able to touch somebody that way is really important to me.
Right. And on the flip side, Fran, do you now approach your current projects thinking that this book might break into the international market again, and so I'll be putting these elements in, or I'll be careful with these considerations? Do you think that way now?
I think yes, for sure. You not like super, but yeah. Ever since dancing hands and attending international fairs this year, really put a lot of things in perspective for me. Just seeing how the bigger picture of picture books, like all around the world, operate. And I do want to be more conscious of that. Not because maybe it's gonna be published abroad, but also like how Pepper puts it, na how it can be uh, a sanctuary for children. Not so much because it's more appealing to publishers to be more diverse or something. So yeah, for sure. But also, I think I want there a balance to be present. Na I am uh, representing the culture enough, but also being wary of creating token characters, or making too much of the same stories. So I still want to make uh, unique stories about Filipino culture also. So
And not to fall into that trap of uh, representing so well without thinking whether your story is actually good. Yeah, remember, because we were at the discussion earlier today at the kids conference, and that came up, the issue of whether I mean, what makes a book successful? What makes a book good? Is it the fact that it's checked all the boxes in terms of diversity and inclusion, or is it still important to have a strong narrative? And I think we all agree that it's important to have a strong narrative.
Yeah, I think also representation goes beyond, like, it's important that children see themselves physically, like they can relate physically, but also there are a lot more ways to be able to relate to characters or stories with beyond like race. Like if they're going through the same thing culturally, like that's how I like personally that's how I get into like TV shows from other cultures. Like if they have the same like family dynamics, or like the elder sister is also very burdened by their family, even though they're not Filipino. Like I can strongly relate with that. So like those kinds of details, I think is also can also contribute to like representation, not just like yeah. So not just like the usual depictions and stuff. So yeah.
Particular subset of kids, not necessarily Filipino, or particular issue that you both want to, you've always wanted to illustrate?
Grief, and I did that with first conversations. Well, that was because it was a whole series of really difficult things to talk about with children. So we have first conversation about race, first conversation about grief, first conversation about consent. So all the things that will get you banned, which we have. Like yes. Um, but I would like to do a more poetic take on loss and loneliness. So those are some of the things I'd like to.
Loss, not necessarily as a result of like death,
Right.
just the feeling of loss. Yeah, yeah. Okay, good luck with that.
Yeah. It'll sell 5 puppies.
What about you, Fran?
Maybe like weirdness. Like also more lyrical books, maybe especially for the Philippines. I think have we can have more of those. Like I feel like children can also like more books that aren't really like don't have a strong narrative but are very like more whimsical and stuff. Yeah, and so
Yeah. Are there questions from the audience for Isabel and for Fran? Yes. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Chibo from the Philippines. Yeah, I agree that um, the West is very big on diversity now, to the point that, of course, because it's also on one hand, we in the Philippines we feel like we just wanted to be treated like everyone, but for like Filipinos in diaspora, they wanted to be seen. That's why they really want to emphasize the culture in the illustrations, in the stories. They want like people from the origin countries to be the one to be illustrating and writing because they want that visibility. So, but yeah, we only just want to be treated equally after all. We don't want to be other, but we also don't want to be patronized. That being said, how now would you introduce the brand of Filipino illustrators to our friends from other countries?
It's so hard because if you assume that there's a brand. Yeah.
Uh,
So is there a brand?
I don't think so because I actually get that question in a different form a lot where it's converse, right? So they always ask, what is so Filipino about your work? And actually, it's very hard for me to answer that question. And also, I don't know that it's my job to answer that question. It's probably for somebody who's studying the work in general in a broad sense. And that's somebody to put that label. And I don't know also that we have that kind of visual tradition that is so markedly different, like the Japanese, where I feel like they have a, s- a set aesthetic. And I'm sure you'll find many a Japanese person who will tell you that that's, completely false.
Yeah.
Um,
What law are you going?
exactly, exactly. So I'm hesitant to name like a kind of brand of it. And if ever, probably the the pastiche is probably more appropriate because of our many histories, like of our the pre-colonial, colonial, American colonial, and that also are yung tagpi-tagpi, which is like a patchwork sense, is probably the most appropriate for our culture, which is like a mixture of things.
What about our treatment of space? I mean, like if you look at early Filipino children's books, like the illustrators would fill up the whole spring. Like there would be no space for breathing.
I think till now, a lot of us still do that. Parang even subconsciously, it just happens. We want to fill up the whole space, like with color, with elements, with lines, whatever. I think it also reflects our life, especially those in the city, because that's our life. Everything's so busy, and like everything we see every day is just filled up. So it reflects in our work also.
Although, in fairness, I mean, to your point, I also try, like you, I mean, you're very empty as a reaction.
Well, do you card?
Yeah, or like even probably do a lot of negative space sort of work because I'm trying not to, um, like we here where I do fill up a couple of scenes, but for contrast, I do actually try to have a lot of very spare space because I be as a reaction to
Because you're conscious of that. I mean, you know, you deep inside your yeah. They seriously just want to tell you that you're doing this because you know that we're like that as a people, that we really just fill up all the space.
I think when I first drew uh, dancing hands, uh, my style before was so different. When I first made the colored study, it was in watercolor, as in fully colored. And then our mentors were like, we like the feel of your sketches better. So it was such a challenge for me to make my sketches look like final art and like just develop this new style and language for this book, which paid off in so like hold on.
So now you know that you have to turn in unfinished work. It's your final art, and that will make your book multi-awarded. Yeah. What about you, Fran? What do you think is our brand, if there is a brand, or maybe just descriptors for our kind of children's art?
Um, I don't know how to describe it more broadly, but like from how I see all our illustrators or most of our illustrators, like we very like color very much, and as you mentioned, like just filling things up with Easter eggs and like details and like texture. So very textured and rich. I think rich is a good word for how to describe Filipino children's books. Yeah, across regions also. It's not just in Manila. Even in like regional picture books, um, illustrators use a lot of color and texture to fill up the space and yeah, to make the yeah, I think rich. Rich is a very
para sulit. What's sulit?
Sulit. To make it more big. So sulit.
Funny because when you talk to other publishers like from Thailand or the Southeast Asian nations, they also mention that like that they whenever we see a South Korean book where there it's very empty space and luxurious, we're like, oh, all that money for that paper that's not being used.
That also reflects the economy of the country where those illustrators are from. Okay. Other questions from the crowd, from our audience? Yes.
Thank you, Fran, and thank you, Isabel. And of course, moderator, who's a string at the same time. I'm interested to know your process of visualizing the children's book. Well, that's first. And second, what is the most difficult part? And what's the most rewarding part of the entire process?
Visualizing. For me, the most difficult part is the very beginning, like the research and the storyboards. Especially with topics that require a lot of research or isn't like the reference books, and like when working with different collaborators, like if it's a science book, I need to work with researchers. So just getting things correct and being able to storyboard them uh, with a visual, like strong visual narrative. So that takes a lot of uh, going back and forth with the editors and with myself. Like just to decide which images go on the spread and make sense when you read it as a whole, and it feels kind of right. So I think that for me, the storyboards and the research is very difficult. And the most rewarding part is when the book is printed and the kids and the parents reach out to me and show me pictures of their children dressed up as a character. So I think as picture book creators, we're kind of behind the scenes most of the time, and we only get to interact with the readers and their parents during like public events unless they reach out. So that's really special for me. When I'm affirmed that our book and our story uh, has made an impact in their families also, and when especially when they tell me that like they're buying a second copy to give away to as gifts, or as like with my book Hating Kapatid, which is about siblings. First time, like when they get their second child, they buy the book because now their kid has someone to share their stuff with, so they need to teach their children how to share. So like things like that, very rewarding for me.
Is there a unique part in your process? Because I know illustrators talk about the process with each other, like how they, how they work on certain projects. Is there something that you do,
Like a ritual.
a ritual, or non book people don't know how much stamina illustrators need to sustain a picture book, for example, illustrating a picture book. So is there a particular thing that you do?
Uh, I think for me, because my attention span is kind of very limited, when I start the book, I really need to kind of run it like a marathon and just finish it without taking breaks. Because if I do, I'm not sure when I'm going to get back to it again. So that's kind of my style. And also because I'm not a full-time children's book illustrator, so I think I have enough breaks from the work on the daily basis that I'm able to take those kinds, like to take my mind off the book and then go back to it with like fresh eyes somehow. So not any particular like special process, just like pushing through it and taking care of my body because it takes a lot. Yeah, as you said, it's a very like physically laborious process just to work on the drawings by hand for a very extended period of time.
Yeah, look at the authors. They're just, they're so relaxed. They just come out with a story that's it. But you need to work day and night on the illustration.
It takes us about 6 months to work on a.
Kidding.
I mean,
There are a lot of illustrators.
madami bang, where are the authors? Hey, raise your hands. No, I mean it takes it's like you said, it's definitely a lot of stamina and a lot of discipline. I mean, it takes me 6 months to make a picture book. Um,
And a lot of motivation.
yeah,
To just like what you're doing.
and
It's the eighth sprint.
we usually hate it at the middle. There's always a point. There's actually a graph where you probably think you're a genius, and then midway you're like, "Oh my God, I just want to kill myself. This is terrible." And then maybe you're like, "Maybe it's not so bad after all." And then the last stage where it's like, "Oh, it's you," you know. And then and then you start talking to kids, and you're like, "Oh, I like it." realize it after all.
And also the most rewarding kind for you.
Absolutely. It's like really interacting with the readers, and just being told that it's resonated with somebody, that they love the story, or that they felt that it helped them talk about certain things, especially for the race book, which I feel like a lot of people are having difficulty opening up that conversation with people just in general, even adults. And so they're always happy that that book is there for them.
What do you do to get through that difficult part? You mentioned that there's a part where you just want to get it over with, yeah. How do you get over that?
I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So that's usually how I get through it, because then you just kind of put yourself on automatic.
Yeah. I think for me, community helps a lot also. So, in the Philippines, we have an illustrators organization for children's books called Ang Ilustrador ng Kabataan, and I'm part of that. I'm actually here as a rep for the org. So, I think having other illustrators to talk to in the middle of your process and just get help with anything that you're having difficulty with, whether it's visualization or technique. So it's really helpful to have a support group like that you can just call anytime and consult with stuff, just to keep things going. So yeah.
You also like it also helps to remember that you've done it before. So you just kind of have that faith that, oh, it's part of this process that you're going to feel like you're failing. Yeah. Yeah.
Part, and I survived it, so shouldn't be too bad. I've had the privilege of being with both of you at the recent Bologna Book Fair, and now you're at Frankfurt. Can you tell us about your experience going to these giant book fairs? I mean, as an illustrator, how has it been? Bologna and when it's only the first day, but Frankfurt, how are you finding it?
Maybe for me, cause Bologna was my first like super big children's focused book fair, and like it's been a dream for us illustrators in the Philippines to go, cause it's like kind of the mecca for children's book and illustration and art. So it was really like it helped me see and think about where my work is in the middle of all these books and art. So, like, because illustrating in the Philippines and like just seeing stuff online is very different from being physically there and just seeing all the books and talking to all these people with like different perspectives. And it made me think about how does my work fit, or like what space does our work and books and stories fit in all these? And also just listening to the talks and hearing the concerns of illustrators and writers and publishers abroad, um, and seeing the similarities with some issues that we face back home is kind of not really comforting. Like, parang we're all in the same boat after all, just on different scales and like different environments. So, like good and bad feeling like, okay, we're all in this together after all. So, and also kind of encourage that to see, like to appreciate that we're the kinds of stories that we're able to publish back home. Not everyone can publish all those stories, I've learned when being in bigger venues. So yeah, those kinds of realizations.
I think also we, as a former colony, we always also have this bit of insecurity that we're always trying to want to kind of double our size like a puffer fish, that like we belong to. And so when you're in that kind of stage, you're always like very conscious that we want to be able to present a face that's like equal to everybody else. And but it's really just exciting, I think, to be able to do that.
Insightful and just overwhelming also. The size of the bears. Yeah. Okay. So let's give a hand to Fran and Isabel for such a delightful and insightful conversation.